So I wasn't going to talk about Madam Web. A lot of people are already talking about Madam Web, but a few people have reached out to me and just said, hey, can you give us your storyteller opinion on Madam Web based on you being an author and being somebody who writes creative works? And I thought, you know what? That is an interesting aspect of this movie and an interesting aspect of where it had a lot of potential but ultimately failed. So let's kind of dive into it. Right off the bat, when you are creating a story, regardless of whether it's a superhero story or not, if this is the origin story of your main protagonist, then you have to have the audience or the reader connect with that protagonist in some way. The way Cassie's character is presented to us in the beginning of the movie makes that difficult already because she's playing hard into that I'm not like all the other girls trope, and that has really been overdone both in film and TV and in literature. A lot of people are tired of this trope, which doesn't mean you can't do it well. You can do it well, but you have to be very conscious of the fact that you are using that trope and simultaneously trying to subvert it. That didn't really happen here, and you can see that most clearly in the baby shower scene and in all of the scenes where Cassie is interacting with the three teenagers. And what makes her dynamic even trickier with the teenage girls is that the teenage girls also kind of fall into that I'm not like all the other girls trope. So you have a group of I'm not like all the other girls, which really adds a lot of conflict if you are trying to single out one of them as being different. Even more so if one of them is supposed to be the leader of the I'm not like all the other girls group. Could be like a band. But from the beginning, I really didn't feel a connection to Cassie as a character. First off, she's not very nice, and that can be a fantastic driving quality of a protagonist that can really drive you in when the main character is not a nice person. But in this case, she was not only not really nice, she was very aloof, and her connection to her family history was so slim and tenuous that I just didn't feel that emotional draw between her story and my story. Which, if you are a storyteller, whether you are a writer, an author, or you are a filmmaker, you want to connect with the emotions of your audience, the emotions of your readership. That is how you draw them into the story. You build up a character and a problematic situation that subconsciously causes the reader or the audience to reflect on their own situation and build that bond between themselves and the protagonist. I felt like that could have been done more effectively, especially if they had taken more time to kind of build up how the loss of her family, her mother, basically caused her to become the woman that she is. The other aspect of the film that I really struggled with was the villain. Now, the best villains or antagonists of stories are either foils of the protagonists or they are similar or same archetypes of the protagonists, but they have just taken a different choice in their journey. Essentially, the best protagonist-antagonist dynamic is when they are both on the same path, they are both on the same journey, but they have both made a significant diverging choice that has put them on a different path. One path to become the protagonist, one path to become the antagonist, but is set up in a way that we can, as the audience, see that either one of them could have become the other. I feel like that was basically non-existent in this film. In fact, the villain's story in general in this film was very superficial. It was very flat. His motivations didn't come from a really believable place. It just felt like there was no depth to his character and to what he was trying to achieve. And I knew about halfway through the movie that the writers struggled with writing the antagonist's dialogue when I realized that the voices weren't lining up. Actually, partway through the movie, I questioned whether the actor was an English speaker. That is something that used to be done in a lot of older films and a lot of older Westerns. We had a lot of actors from other countries that were filling roles and then they were dubbed over in English. I thought that was what was being done here. And then I realized, like, about 2/3 into the film that the scenes where the villain was talking was basically monologuing, because he almost monologues every single scene that he has. They were doing a lot of cuts away from his face and they were focusing on the person he was talking to, which is really jarring. It's very weird. And I kept thinking to myself, why are we focusing on this particular character's reaction to what he is saying when this character doesn't serve a very important function in the story going forward? And then I realized that they had probably gone back in post-production and adjusted the audio, changed the dialogue in a sense, and then they couldn't have him speaking directly on screen. We would have noticed too obviously that his mouth was off from the dialogue. And panning the camera onto somebody else's face was their way of covering and adjusting for that. But essentially his dialogue for the entire film was very weak and didn't really convey any important aspect of his character. A great antagonist makes you understand them. You understand why they have chosen to take a certain path. And sometimes you even feel for them. You feel sympathetic towards them. Think of the best antagonists in film and TV and literature. And they also, like the protagonist, draw the viewer or the reader in with some kind of emotional connection. And that was definitely missing here. The three girls had a really good vibe, and I think that is where a lot of the movie failed, because this was essentially an origin story for Cassie, and the best part of the film was the interaction between the trio. I think a better choice would have been to not make an origin story at all, to just jump ahead 2 years and go right into the middle of the three Spider-Women story and maybe give some flashbacks as to how they came together, or just eventually made a sequel that was a prequel as to how they came together, because I think the best story was not necessarily Cassie's story, it was the story of the three girls. And honestly, props to the costumes department, because the best scenes in the film are the scenes where we see the three girls in their Spider-Woman costumes. Those are the best scenes from a cinematic perspective. And it is really unfortunate that those scenes are literally less than a minute of the whole film. And just from a dialogue writing perspective, the superhero or supervillain monologue is extremely difficult to pull off in a serious film. If you're making a comic book satire film, then you can really use this to kind of hone in the satire aspect of the movie. But if you're not trying to be funny and you're not trying to be satirical and you're making a superhero or comic book related movie in this time period for modern audiences, the monologue just doesn't work anymore. It gives a very 90s movie vibe, and it worked in the 90s because of the stylistic choices of films in that time period, specifically superhero films. Just watch the old Batman movies for reference and you'll see what I mean. But that doesn't really work anymore. Anyway, this was supposed to be a very short critical video, and it turned out way too long, but those are my initial critical criticisms of Madam Web. I think there was a lot of potential that was sadly missed. And it makes me very sad that we're not going to get to see movies like Batgirl, but we get to see this one. And yes, I understand that that's a different film company, but you know what I mean.